September 27, 1941, 10:47 a.m., Baltimore, Maryland. The keel plate hit the building with a sound like thunder. Henry J. Kaiser stood in the observation tower of his newly constructed Bethlehem Fairfield shipyard, watching welders swarm the steel skeleton below. Around him, naval architects from the Maritime Commission exchanged nervous glances. What they were witnessing violated every principle of traditional shipbuilding. The man beside them, a 59-year-old industrialist who had never built a ship in his life, had just promised to construct a 10,000-ton cargo vessel in 56 days. The Maritime Commission's own estimates said 335 days was optimistic. The British, who had been building ships for centuries, averaged 260 days. Kaiser's promise seemed less like ambition and more like delusion. Admiral Emory Land, head of the Maritime Commission, studied the controlled chaos below. Prefabricated sections were being moved by crane from assembly areas scattered across the yard. Welders worked in teams of 4, their torches creating constellations of sparks against the gray steel. Traditional shipyards moved from bow to stern, building sequentially. Kaiser was assembling his ship like a child's toy, snapping together massive pre-built sections. "Mr. Kaiser," Land said carefully, "you understand that shipbuilding is not the same as building dams or bridges. The tolerances are measured in thousandths of an inch. The stresses are complex. One mistake and the ship breaks apart in the first storm." Kaiser didn't look away from the building way. "Admiral, I don't know anything about ships, but I know about production, and production is about breaking impossible tasks into possible pieces." What none of them knew, standing in that tower on that September morning, was that they were witnessing the beginning of the greatest industrial achievement in maritime history. Within 3 years, Kaiser's impossible methods would produce more cargo tonnage than all other American shipyards combined. His welders, most of whom had never seen an ocean, would launch vessels faster than the Germans could sink them. The U-boats that prowled the Atlantic, sinking Allied ships faster than traditional yards could replace them, were about to encounter an opponent they couldn't comprehend. Not a weapon or a tactic, but something more terrifying: American mass production unleashed by a man who didn't know what couldn't be done. The mathematics of defeat were simple in September 1941. German U-boats were sinking Allied ships at a rate of 500,000 tons per month. American and British shipyards combined were producing 300,000 tons monthly. The gap was widening. Britain was starving. The Soviet Union was bleeding. The war would be lost, not through military defeat, but through simple arithmetic. The Allies would run out of ships before Germany ran out of torpedoes. Traditional shipbuilding was an art form that took months. Master craftsmen riveted steel plates to frames, building from keel to deck in a process largely unchanged since the ironclad era. Each ship was essentially custom-built, with skilled workers making constant adjustments to account for the unique characteristics of the materials and design. A typical cargo vessel requires 200 days from keel laying to launch, with another 50 days for fitting out. Henry Kaiser had made his fortune doing the impossible. Born in 1882 to German immigrants in upstate New York, he'd quit school at 13 to support his family. By 30, he owned a road paving company. By 40, he was building highways across the American West. In the 1930s, he'd led the consortium that built the Hoover Dam, Boulder Dam as it was then known, completing the largest concrete structure ever attempted ahead of schedule and under budget. His secret wasn't engineering genius, it was organizational ruthlessness. Kaiser broke complex projects into simple, repeatable tasks. He identified bottlenecks and eliminated them through parallel production. He trained unskilled workers to do specialized jobs through rigid standardization. Where traditional contractors saw craftsmanship, Kaiser saw assembly lines. When the Maritime Commission approached him in 1940, desperate for shipbuilding capacity, Kaiser saw another impossible problem ready to be solved. The Commission wanted him to build a shipyard and produce British-designed cargo vessels called ocean-class freighters. These ships, later designated EC2S2C1 by the Americans and known universally as Liberty ships, were deliberately simple. No frills, no speed, no elegance. Just 441 feet of welded steel designed to carry 10,000 tons of cargo across the Atlantic and survive long enough to deliver it. The British design was already a compromise. Traditional cargo ships used riveted construction, with hundreds of thousands of rivets driven by skilled workers. The EC2 design used welding, faster, but considered less reliable by maritime engineers. The ship had a cruising speed of 11 knots, barely fast enough to outrun a surfaced U-boat. Its triple-expansion steam engine was a 19th-century design, obsolete but simple to manufacture. Everything about the Liberty ship screamed good enough. Kaiser looked at the drawings and saw something the naval architects missed. The ship wasn't just simple, it was modular. The hull could be divided into sections. The sections could be built separately. The sections could be built simultaneously. On December 7, 1941, Japanese aircraft attacked Pearl Harbor. 4 days later, Germany declared war on the United States. The arithmetic of defeat became immediate. America needed ships, needed them in quantities that seemed impossible, needed them faster than any shipyard had ever produced them. The first Liberty ship built in a Kaiser yard, the SS Ocean Vanguard, launched on October 15, 1941, before Pearl Harbor, before America entered the war. It took 244 days from keel to launch. A respectable time, but nothing revolutionary. The Maritime Commission congratulated Kaiser politely and wondered privately if the dam builder was out of his depth. Kaiser was studying the production process with the same intensity he'd applied to concrete pours at Hoover Dam. Every delay, every bottleneck, every moment of waiting was an inefficiency to be eliminated. Traditional shipyards built the hull first, then installed the internal structure, then the machinery, then the piping and wiring. Each stage waited for the previous stage to complete. Kaiser decided to build everything simultaneously. At his Richmond, California yard, later called Kaiser Permanente Shipyard No. 1, he divided the Liberty ship into 250 prefabricated sections. The bottom, the sides, the deck houses, the engine rooms were built in separate assembly areas. While welders worked on the keel, other teams were completing the superstructure. While electricians wired the bridge, plumbers were installing the engine room piping in a section that wouldn't be attached to the ship for weeks. The innovation was conceptually simple. The execution was revolutionary. Each prefabricated section had to fit perfectly with its neighbors. Tolerances measured in fractions of an inch across sections weighing 50 tons. One measurement error and the sections wouldn't mate. The ship would be scrap metal. Kaiser hired anyone willing to work: housewives, farmers, teenagers, and retirees. Portland Shipyard employed a 74-year-old grandmother as a welder. Richmond Yard hired entire families. By 1943, 27% of Kaiser's workforce was female. The legendary Rosie the Riveter, though Liberty ships used welding, not riveting, was born in Kaiser's yards. These weren't skilled shipbuilders. Most had never seen welding equipment before their first day. Kaiser's training program lasted 1 week, 7 days from civilian to shipyard worker. The maritime unions screamed. The Navy expressed deep concern. Kaiser kept hiring. The training focused on one thing: repeatability. Each worker learned one specific task: welding one type of seam, installing one type of pipe fitting, driving one size of bolt.
They did that task hundreds of times per shift. They became extraordinarily efficient at that one task. The complexity of shipbuilding was broken into thousands of simple, repeatable operations. Traditional shipwrights saw this as desecration. Shipbuilding was a craft requiring years of apprenticeship. Kaiser was turning it into factory work. They predicted catastrophic failures, ships breaking apart at sea, welds cracking in cold Atlantic water, sections separating under stress. The SS Patrick Henry launched on September 27, 1941, the first Liberty ship completed under the Emergency Shipbuilding Program. President Roosevelt attended the ceremony, declaring, "This launching of the Patrick Henry marks the launching of the Emergency Shipbuilding Program. May it be found that American ships can sail every sea and carry help to those who are fighting for liberty." The Patrick Henry took 244 days to build. Respectable, but not revolutionary. Kaiser was just beginning. The second ship took 210 days. The fifth ship took 150 days. The 10th ship took 105 days. The production time was dropping not by increments, but by quantum leaps. Each ship taught Kaiser's workers something new. Each launch revealed another inefficiency to eliminate. By March 1942, Kaiser's Richmond Yard was launching a Liberty ship every 40 days. The Maritime Commission was ecstatic. The impossible had become routine. Then Kaiser announced his next target, 30 days. The naval architects said it couldn't be done. The physics of welding required time. The complexity of systems integration required time. Time couldn't be eliminated beyond a certain point. Kaiser didn't care about what couldn't be done. On April 23, 1942, the SS Joseph N. Teal launched 33 days after keel laying. 10 days later, the SS William Clark launched after 31 days. The production time kept dropping. The Germans noticed. U-boat commanders were accustomed to thinking in terms of gross registered tons. Sink a 10,000-ton freighter, and you dealt a quantifiable blow to Allied logistics. Admiral Karl Donitz, commanding the U-boat fleet, calculated that sinking 700,000 tons per month would starve Britain into surrender. In March 1942, U-boats sank 273 Allied ships, totaling 834,000 tons. It was the highest monthly toll of the war. Donitz was winning. Then the American production numbers began arriving through intelligence channels. The numbers seemed impossible. American yards had launched 48 merchant ships in March 1942. The Germans assumed these were small coastal vessels, or the output of an entire year being reported monthly. By June 1942, American yards were launching 140 ships per month. Total tonnage, 1.1 million tons. For the first time since 1940, production exceeded losses. The gap was closing. Donitz increased U-boat deployments. More submarines, more torpedoes, more kills. The wolf packs ranged further into the Atlantic, attacking convoys with coordinated tactics that overwhelmed escorts. In November 1942, U-boats sank 119 ships, but American yards launched 156. Kaiser's Richmond Yard was now completing a Liberty ship every 24 days on average. The prefabrication areas worked around the clock, feeding the building ways with completed sections. The workforce had swollen to 90,000 across Kaiser's 7 shipyards. Richmond alone employed 27,000 workers, operating in 3 shifts. The yards never slept. Welders' torches lit the night sky. Cranes moved in synchronized choreography. The sound of steel on steel echoed across San Francisco Bay 24 hours a day. In September 1942, Kaiser made an announcement that seemed to confirm his reputation for insanity. Richmond Yard would build a Liberty ship in 14 days, not as a target, as a demonstration, to prove that American production had no limits. The ship would be the SS Robert E. Peary, named for the Arctic explorer. Keel laying was scheduled for November 8, 1942. Launch date, November 22nd. 14 days, 336 hours, 20,160 minutes. The Maritime Commission was horrified. The publicity could be catastrophic if the attempt failed. If the ship broke apart during launch or proved unseaworthy, it would validate every criticism of Kaiser's methods. The Navy suggested quietly that perhaps 14 days was too ambitious. Kaiser disagreed. The demonstration would prove what he already knew, that shipbuilding time was limited only by organization, not by physics. The correct application of parallel production could collapse schedules beyond what traditional thinking allowed. On November 8, 1942, at 12:01 a.m., the first peel plate of the Robert E. Peary touched the building way. Kaiser had assembled the best workers from across his yards. The prefabrication teams had been preparing for weeks. Every section was ready. Every weld had been practiced. The assembly sequence had been choreographed like a ballet. The whole sections came together in 48 hours. Massive cranes lifted 50-ton assemblies into place. Welders swarmed each seam. As the hull took shape, other teams installed the engine, which had been completely assembled and tested in a separate building. The deck houses were lifted into place as single units. The bridge arrived complete with all instrumentation installed. Traditional shipbuilding installed systems sequentially. Engine first, then piping, then wiring, then testing each system before moving to the next. Kaiser installed everything simultaneously. The engine was running on a test stand while being lowered into the hull. The electrical systems were energized before the deck was complete. Risk management was replaced by ruthless scheduling. 72 hours into the build, naval inspectors arrived. What they saw violated every rule in the shipbuilding manual. Welders were completing hull seams while electricians were pulling cables through the same spaces. The engine was being connected to the propeller shaft while the stern section was still being assembled. The superstructure was being painted while the deck fittings were being installed. The inspectors predicted catastrophic failure. The ship would never pass sea trials. The engine wouldn't align properly. The welds would crack. The whole thing was a publicity stunt that would end in disaster. November 12, 1942, 4 days into the build, the Robert E. Peary was 60% complete. The hull was fully welded. The engine was installed. The superstructure was attached. Interior spaces were being finished. The schedule was holding. Kaiser's workers were operating on a level of precision that seemed impossible for people with weeks of training. But they weren't relying on expertise. They were relying on repetition. Each worker had done their specific task hundreds of times. They could do it in their sleep. They could do it under impossible time pressure. November 15, 1942, 7 days, the Robert E. Peary was completely structural. The remaining work was systems testing and finishing. The ship looked ready to launch. Traditional shipbuilders examined it and found nothing obviously wrong. The welds appeared solid. The systems appeared functional. But 7 days wasn't enough time to properly test anything. November 20th, 1942, 12 days. The Robert E. Peary underwent sea trials in San Francisco Bay. The engine performed flawlessly. The steering answered properly. The ship handled exactly as designed. Inspectors searched for problems and found minor issues only. A few leaking pipe fittings, some electrical connections needed tightening. Nothing structural, nothing critical. November 22nd, 1942, 14 days, the Robert E. Peary launched with full ceremony. Newsreel cameras captured the moment. Kaiser stood on the platform, vindicated. The ship that couldn't be built in 14 days slid into San Francisco Bay, complete and seaworthy. The final construction time, 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes from keel laying to launch. Not 14 days, 4.5 days. Kaiser had beaten his own impossible deadline by 225 hours. The Robert E. Peary sailed into the Pacific on December 5, 1942, carrying 10,000 tons of military cargo. It would complete 30 voyages during the war, carrying everything from tanks to grain. It survived torpedo attacks, storms, and the brutal conditions of the North Atlantic. The ship, built in less than 5 days, lasted longer than many vessels built over a year. The Germans learned of the 4-day ship through intelligence reports. They assumed it was propaganda. No ship could be built in 4 days. The physical limitations of welding alone made it impossible. German shipyards, among the most efficient in the world, required 180 days minimum for comparable vessels. The American claim was an obvious fabrication. Donitz dismissed the reports and focused on the strategic situation. Even if Americans were producing ships quickly, the U-boats were still sinking them faster. The November 1942 numbers showed 119 merchant ships sunk. The wolf packs were strangling the Atlantic. Victory was mathematical. Then the December production numbers arrived. American yards had launched 208 merchant ships. Total tonnage, 1.8 million tons. In 1 month, America had produced more shipping than Germany had sunk in the previous 3 months combined. The balance had shifted. For every ship the U-boats sent to the bottom, American yards launched 3 replacements. The strategy of tonnage warfare, which had nearly worked in 1917 and seemed to be working in 1942, suddenly faced an opponent it couldn't overcome. American industrial capacity operating at full mobilization was producing faster than Germany could destroy. Kaiser's yards were the core of this production miracle. By early 1943, his 7 facilities were launching a Liberty ship every day, not collectively. Each yard was averaging 1 ship per day. Richmond Yard alone produced 45 ships in the first quarter of 1943. The production statistics defied comprehension. Each Liberty ship required 250,000 separate parts, over 30,000 prefabricated sections, 200 miles of welding, 15,000 separate welds per ship. Yet Kaiser's workers, most with less than 6 months of experience, were assembling these complex machines in less than 30 days on average. The secret was organization, raised to an art form. Every worker knew exactly where to be at exactly what time. Materials arrived at workstations precisely when needed. Nothing waited. No inventory sat idle. The entire production process flowed like water, each element moving smoothly into the next. Traditional shipyards operated with craftsmen who understood the entire ship. Kaiser operated with specialists who understood one small piece. The traditional approach created flexibility and adaptability. Kaiser's approach created speed and volume. In peacetime, flexibility won. In war, speed was everything. The human cost of this speed was substantial. Kaiser's yards had the highest accident rate in American shipbuilding. Workers fell from scaffolding. Cranes dropped loads. Welding fires erupted. The compressed schedules left little room for safety protocols. Between 1942 and 1945, Kaiser's yards recorded 568 fatalities and over 12,000 serious injuries. Kaiser implemented aggressive safety programs, but the fundamental problem remained. Building ships in 30 days meant workers operated under constant time pressure. Fatigue led to mistakes. Mistakes led to accidents. The price of speed was measured in lives. The workers understood the arithmetic. Dangerous conditions at home versus dead soldiers overseas. Every day a ship sat incomplete was another day the U-boats held an advantage. Every Liberty ship launched was 10,000 tons of cargo capacity that could carry ammunition, food, fuel, and weapons to forces fighting for survival. Wendy the welder, one of many women who worked in Kaiser's yards, later recalled, "We knew the risks. Every morning you'd see the ambulances. But we also saw the casualty lists from Europe. My brother was in North Africa. Every ship we launched might be carrying supplies that kept him alive. You can't think about safety when boys are dying for lack of bullets." By mid-1943, the Liberty ship production had become so routine that Kaiser began pursuing other vessels. Victory ships, faster cargo carriers with turbine engines. Escort carriers, small aircraft carriers built on tanker hulls. Landing ships, tank carriers, tankers, troop transports, anything that could be mass-produced using his modular methods. The escort carrier program demonstrated Kaiser's methods applied to complex warships. Traditional carriers required 3 years to build. Kaiser produced his first escort carrier, USS Casablanca, in 180 days. The Navy was skeptical. Carriers were sophisticated vessels requiring precise engineering. Kaiser's rapid construction couldn't possibly produce combat-worthy ships. The Casablanca-class carriers proved exceptionally effective, simple, reliable, and available in quantity. Kaiser would build 50 escort carriers during the war, more than half of all American escort carrier production. These ships provided air cover for convoys, conducted anti-submarine patrols, and supported amphibious operations from North Africa to the Philippines. The same pattern emerged with every vessel type Kaiser attempted: initial skepticism, impossible production promises, rapid construction that seemed to violate physical laws, ships that performed exactly as designed despite being built at an absurd speed. In October 1943, Kaiser invited representatives from the British Admiralty to tour Richmond Yard. The British had pioneered emergency shipbuilding with their Ocean-class design. They wanted to see how Americans had achieved such extraordinary production rates. The tour left the British delegation speechless. They watched a Liberty ship take shape over 3 days. Prefabricated sections, larger than houses, are lifted into place, welders completing seams in hours that would take British yards days. The organized chaos of parallel production operating at a scale that seemed impossible. Commander Harold Johnson of the Royal Navy wrote in his report, "The Americans have industrialized shipbuilding to a degree we cannot comprehend. They treat ships as manufactured products rather than constructed vessels. The result is crude by traditional standards, but effective beyond question. A Liberty ship is not a good ship, but produced in these numbers, they don't need to be good. They simply need to float and carry cargo. At that task, they are adequate." The word adequate understated reality. Liberty ships were carrying 75% of all cargo shipped to Europe by late 1943. They supplied the invasion of North Africa, Sicily, and Italy. They formed the backbone of the convoys supplying Britain and the Soviet Union. They were literally keeping the Allied war effort afloat. The Germans adjusted tactics. If American production couldn't be matched, perhaps the ships themselves could be made less effective. U-boats began targeting Liberty ships specifically, seeking to prove they were poorly constructed death traps that would break apart under combat stress. The results disappointed German expectations. Liberty ships proved remarkably durable. Their welded construction, initially considered a weakness, created hulls that distributed stress better than riveted vessels. When damaged, they stayed afloat longer. When torpedoed, they often remained buoyant long enough for crews to escape. The SS Richard Montgomery, torpedoed off Algeria in August 1943, took 5 hours to sink after the torpedo strike. The crew abandoned ship without casualties. The vessel, loaded with 10,000 tons of ammunition, settled to the bottom without exploding. Similar damage to a traditional freighter would have resulted in catastrophic, rapid sinking. Not all Liberty ships survived. Some did break apart, victims of metal fatigue or structural failures. The SS John P. Gaines was split completely in half in calm seas off Alaska in November 1943. Investigations revealed that welding in extreme cold had created brittle zones in the hull. The findings led to improved welding procedures and mandatory heating during construction. Kaiser implemented the changes within weeks. Traditional shipyards would have spent months studying the problem. Kaiser analyzed, corrected, and moved forward. The production schedule barely stuttered. By January 1944, American shipyards had launched 5,171 vessels since Pearl Harbor. Total tonnage, 19 million tons. Germany had sunk 3,611 Allied ships, totaling 21 million tons over the same period. But that figure included ships sunk in 1940 and 1941 before American production reached full capacity. In 1943 alone, American production exceeded all Allied losses by 8 million tons. The arithmetic of defeat had reversed. Admiral Donitz, promoted to Commander-in-Chief of the German Navy in January 1943, understood the implications. In a meeting with Hitler, he presented the numbers. "We are sinking 50,000 tons per U-boat per month. The Americans are producing 1.5 million tons per month. We would need to triple our submarine fleet to match their production. We cannot build U-boats faster than they build merchant ships." Hitler ordered increased U-boat production. German shipyards strained to comply. By late 1944, Germany was launching 30 U-boats per month, an impressive rate that represented the total mobilization of shipbuilding capacity. But American yards were launching 140 merchant ships per month. 3 ships for every U-boat. The mathematics remained impossible. The Liberty ship program cost $13 billion between 1941 and 1945. Each ship averaged $2 million to construct, less expensive than a single B-17 bomber. The 2,710 Liberty ships built during the war represented less than 1% of total American war expenditure. The return on investment was incalculable. Kaiser's personal fortune grew accordingly. His companies earned $643 million in profits from wartime shipbuilding. Critics called him a war profiteer. Defenders noted that his profit margin averaged 4%, far below typical manufacturing margins. The Fortune 500 companies of 1944 averaged 15% profit margins. The workers who built the ships saw modest gains. Average wages at Kaiser yards were $1.20 per hour, 50% above pre-war manufacturing wages. Work weeks averaged 60 hours, with overtime pay for anything beyond 40. A welder working full-time could earn over $3,000 annually, enough to support a family comfortably by 1940 standards. Kaiser used profits to create the nation's first prepaid group medical plan for shipyard workers. The Kaiser Permanente healthcare system, now serving 12 million members, began as a way to keep workers healthy and productive. It was innovative medical care driven by industrial efficiency requirements. By mid-1944, the strategic situation had transformed completely. Allied shipping losses were negligible compared to available tonnage. Convoys crossed the Atlantic with minimal losses. The U-boat threat, while not eliminated, had become manageable. The invasion of France proceeded with logistic superiority that would have seemed impossible 2 years earlier.
On June 6, 1944, Operation Overlord put 156,000 troops ashore in Normandy. The assault required 6,939 naval vessels, including 4,126 landing craft and 1,213 combat ships. Supporting this armada were thousands of cargo vessels carrying fuel, ammunition, food, vehicles, and equipment. Many were Liberty ships, built in Kaiser's yards. The Liberty ship SS Charles Morgan, launched from Richmond Yard in February 1944, made 4 round trips across the Channel in the first 2 weeks after D-Day. Each crossing carried 10,000 tons of cargo. In 14 days, one ship transported 40,000 tons of material to support the invasion. Multiply that by the hundreds of cargo ships in operation, and the scale of logistics becomes apparent. Defenders, even those not under direct attack, could hear the evidence of their coming defeat. The constant rumble of ships' engines echoed across the Channel. Thousands of vessels moving in coordinated patterns, supplying an invasion force that could not be stopped because it could not be starved. Kaiser's yards continued operating at full capacity through 1944, though the focus shifted from Liberty ships to specialized vessels, landing craft for Pacific operations, tankers for naval task forces, hospital ships, repair ships, floating dry docks, anything that floated and served a purpose. The final Liberty ship, SS Albert M. Bow, launched from Permanente Metals Yard 2 in Richmond on September 30, 1945. World War II had ended 3 weeks earlier. The ship served in the merchant fleet until 1967, one of the last Liberty ships in active service. Total Liberty ship production, 2,710 vessels. Total tonnage, 27 million tons. Average construction time, 42 days. Fastest construction time, 4 days, 15 hours, 29 minutes. Total man-hours, 2.5 million per ship. Total workforce employed, 640,000 across all yards. Cost per ship, $1.98 million. Total program cost, $5.2 billion. The Liberty ships themselves were not elegant. They rolled heavily in rough seas, earning the nickname Sea Cows. The reciprocating engines were noisy and inefficient. The accommodation was basic. The speed was barely adequate. Everything about the design screamed compromise and expedience. But they worked. They carried 75% of all cargo shipped overseas during the war. They supplied Britain, the Soviet Union, North Africa, Italy, France, and the Pacific theaters. They operated in every ocean and every climate. They survived storms, torpedoes, collisions, and the brutal conditions of wartime logistics. Of the 2,710 Liberty ships built, 200 were lost to enemy action, another 31 were lost to marine casualties, a loss rate of 8.5%, lower than most military vessels. The robust construction that traditional shipbuilders had questioned proved remarkably effective at keeping cargo and crews alive. After the war, Liberty ships continued serving. Many were sold to commercial operators. Some operated into the 1980s, 40 years after construction. The SS Jeremiah O'Brien, launched in 1943, remains operational as a museum ship in San Francisco. Visitors can walk the decks, examine the engine room, and see what Henry Kaiser built when everyone said it couldn't be done. The post-war assessments of Kaiser's achievement ranged from grudging admiration to outright awe. The British Admiralty, initially skeptical, concluded that American mass production had won the Battle of the Atlantic more decisively than any tactical or technological innovation. German naval historians analyzing their defeat pointed to the Liberty ship program as the moment they realized the war was mathematically unwinnable. Admiral Dönitz, captured in 1945, was asked about the U-boat campaign.
His response was clinical. "We fought with excellence. Our crews were brave, our tactics were sound, our technology was advanced. But we were trying to bail out the ocean with buckets while the Americans opened the floodgates. For every ship we sank, they built 3. Eventually, the mathematics defeated us." The Liberty Ship program demonstrated a fundamental principle of industrial warfare. Quality matters, but quantity has a quality all its own. A good ship built in a year is less valuable than an adequate ship built in a month if you need 100 ships immediately. Kaiser understood this intuitively. The maritime establishment learned it grudgingly. The methods Kaiser pioneered in shipbuilding spread throughout American war production: modular construction, parallel assembly, standardized components, unskilled labor performing specialized tasks. These principles were applied to aircraft production, tank manufacturing, ammunition production, and every other aspect of military logistics. Boeing's Seattle plant built B-17 bombers using Kaiser's methods, reducing construction time from 36,000 man-hours to 18,000. Ford's Willow Run plant produced B-24 Liberators at a rate of 1 per hour using assembly line techniques adapted from Kaiser's yards. The entire American war economy became a vast machine for turning raw materials into finished weapons faster than enemies could destroy them. Kaiser himself became a celebrity. Time magazine featured him on the cover in August 1942 with the headline, "Master Builder." Newsreels showed his yards launching ships. Hollywood made a propaganda film, The Story of Liberty Ships, featuring Kaiser. He embodied American industrial might, the civilian industrialist turning the tide of war through sheer organizational brilliance. After the war, Kaiser expanded into aluminum production, steel manufacturing, home construction, and automobiles. The Kaiser Fraser Automobile Company produced innovative cars but failed commercially, unable to compete against the Big Three. Kaiser's talents lay in mass production under crisis conditions, not in peacetime competition. The Richmond shipyards, which had employed 90,000 workers at peak production, closed in 1945. The massive facilities were dismantled. The land was redeveloped. Today, the site hosts offices, parks, and the Rosie the Riveter World War II Home Front National Historical Park. Visitors can see the remnants of building ways where Liberty ships took shape in days. The workforce that built the ships dispersed back to peacetime lives. Women who had been welders returned to traditional roles or fought for new opportunities in industry. Men who had learned shipbuilding skills moved to other manufacturing jobs. The temporary workers who had been farmers, housewives, and students went back to their previous lives. But they carried with them the knowledge that the impossible was possible, that conventional wisdom about what couldn't be done was often wrong, that a man who had never built a ship could outproduce shipyards with centuries of experience by refusing to accept limitations. One final story captures the essence of Kaiser's achievement. In March 1943, a German U-boat torpedoed and sank the Liberty ship SS William Clark in the North Atlantic. The crew was rescued by escorts. The ship sank with its cargo. A clear German victory. 6 weeks later, the SS William Clark II launched from Richmond Yard. Same name, same design, same cargo capacity. The replacement ship was delivered faster than the insurance paperwork for the original. U-Boat Command noted this replacement in their intelligence reports. The notation was brief. American production capacity negates tactical success. Strategic situation untenable. The Germans had sunk one ship. The Americans had built another before the wreckage stopped settling to the ocean floor. This was the reality of fighting a war against American industrial capacity operating at full mobilization. You could win every battle and still lose because the enemy simply rebuilt faster than you could destroy. Henry Kaiser didn't invent the Liberty ship. British designers created the basic design. Maritime Commission engineers refined it. Traditional shipyards built the first examples. But Kaiser transformed it into a weapon. Not a weapon that fired shells or dropped bombs, but a weapon that won through existence, by being produced in numbers that made defeat impossible, by replacing losses faster than enemies could inflict them, by turning shipbuilding from a craft into an assembly line. The Battle of the Atlantic was not won by depth charges or convoy tactics or long-range aircraft, though all contributed. It was won by a 59-year-old dam builder who looked at an impossible production target and saw only interesting engineering problems to solve. When Kaiser promised to build ships in 56 days, experts said impossible. When he built them in 30 days, experts said unrepeatable. When he built one in 4 days, experts stopped making predictions. The man who knew nothing about ships had taught the world how to build them. The final statistics remain stunning 8 decades later. In 1941, the United States Merchant Marine totaled 1,100 ocean-going vessels. By 1945, it totaled 5,000 vessels. The majority were Liberty ships and related designs built using Kaiser's methods. In 4 years, American shipyards increased the merchant fleet by 450%. Kaiser's yards alone produced 1,490 vessels, accounting for 30% of all American wartime ship construction. Every 10 hours, somewhere in America, a new cargo ship was launched during the war years. Every 2 minutes, a U-boat crewman died trying to sink them. The mathematics of industrial warfare played out in steel and seawater, with American production overwhelming German destruction. The Liberty ships themselves were not elegant weapons. They were blunt instruments of logistics. But they won the war as surely as any fighter or bomber. They kept Britain fed. They kept Russia armed. They supplied the armies that liberated Europe and conquered the Pacific. They represented American industrial might translated into floating steel. And they were built, thousands of them, by workers who had never seen a ship before their first shift, welded by housewives, assembled by farmers, launched by the mad shipbuilder who proved that impossible was just another word for a problem nobody had properly organized yet. The Kaiser shipyards operated for 4 years. In that time, they rewrote the rules of maritime construction, transformed ship production from craft to industry, and proved that American organizational genius could overcome any material challenge given sufficient motivation and freedom to ignore conventional wisdom. They said it couldn't be done. Henry Kaiser never cared what they said. He knew only one thing. Production was about breaking impossible tasks into possible pieces. And he proved it, one Liberty ship at a time, until the Atlantic belonged to America, and the U-boats hunted in seas filled with more targets than torpedoes to sink them. The thunder of Kaiser's yards has been silent for 80 years, but the lesson remains. When the nation needed ships, a man who never built one produced more tonnage than all other American yards combined, not through maritime expertise, but through relentless industrial logic applied without mercy to every limitation and bottleneck. The experts laughed, the U-boats hunted, the Liberty ships sailed, and America won. The SS Stephen Hopkins provided perhaps the clearest demonstration of Liberty ship durability under impossible conditions. On September 27, 1942, in the South Atlantic, the Hopkins encountered 2 German commerce raiders, the Stier, a converted freighter armed with 6 5.9-inch guns, and the Tonfels, an armed supply ship. The Liberty ship carried a single 4-inch deck gun and two 37mm anti-aircraft weapons. The German raiders carried combined firepower equivalent to a light cruiser. The engagement should have lasted minutes, ending with the Hopkins at the bottom and her crew in lifeboats. Instead, the Hopkins fought for 20 minutes. Her armed guard crew, 19 Navy gunners supplementing the merchant crew, manned the deck gun while German shells tore the ship apart. The Hopkins was hit 15 times. The bridge was destroyed, the engine room flooded, fires erupted across 3 decks. The merchant crew fought the flames while the Navy gunners kept firing. They hit the Stier 4 times, not glancing blows but solid hits that penetrated the raider's hull and detonated in her engine spaces. The German ship, never designed for combat with an armed opponent, began taking water. Her engines failed. She was dead in the water, burning, sinking. The Hopkins was also sinking. The final shell from the Stier had penetrated the engine room. The chief engineer, Paul Buck, stayed at his post trying to maintain steam pressure as water rose around him. He drowned at his station, keeping the engines running until the sea claimed him. The Hopkins sank stern first. The crew abandoned ship in 3 lifeboats. Of the 61 men aboard, 19 died, including all the armed guard sailors. The survivors were rescued after 31 days in lifeboats. The Stier sank 5 hours after the engagement. The Tonfels rescued the German crew and fled. A Liberty ship built in Portland in 63 days by workers with minimal training had fought a purpose-built commerce raider to mutual destruction. The Adequate ship, designed only to carry cargo, had proven adequate to fight when fighting was required. The story reached Kaiser's yards through Navy channels. Workers who had questioned whether their rushed construction produced seaworthy vessels now understood. The welds they completed in hours were strong enough to hold together under combat stress. The hull they assembled in days was tough enough to absorb repeated hits from naval guns. Their work was saving lives. Production increased. Kaiser's Richmond yard achieved 35 ship launches in December 1942, 1 ship every 21 hours. The building ways never stood empty. As one hull slid into the bay, prefabricated sections for the next were already being moved into position. The logistical choreography required to maintain this pace defied comprehension. Each Liberty ship required 200 tons of welding electrodes. The Richmond yards consumed 7,000 tons of electrodes monthly. Railway cars delivered them continuously. Steel arrived in 100-ton loads every 6 hours. Paint, piping, electrical cable, lumber, rubber, instruments, machinery. Everything needed to build ships arrived in coordinated flows that never interrupted production. Kaiser's purchasing department operated like a military logistics command. They tracked suppliers across 48 states. They identified bottlenecks before they occurred. They maintained alternate sources for every critical component. When one supplier fell behind, another seamlessly filled the gap. The yards never stopped because materials never stopped arriving. The human logistics were equally complex. 90,000 workers required housing, food, medical care, transportation, and entertainment. Kaiser built entire communities around his yards. Richmond Shipyard City housed 22,000 workers in prefabricated apartments built using the same modular techniques as the ships. The community had schools, hospitals, shops, and recreation facilities. It was constructed in 9 months. The child care centers Kaiser established to enable mothers to work pioneered all-day kindergarten in America. The medical clinics he built to keep workers healthy pioneered prepaid group medical care. The cafeterias he operated to feed workers efficiently pioneered industrial food service at scale. Kaiser was inventing modern industrial infrastructure while building ships, solving problems that hadn't existed before women entered heavy manufacturing and Moss. Margaret Cantwell, who worked as a welder at Richmond Yard from 1942 to 1945, later recalled the atmosphere. You worked until you couldn't think straight. Then you went home, slept 4 hours, and came back. Nobody complained. We knew boys were dying because they didn't have ammunition or food or fuel. Every ship we finished might save 100 lives, maybe 1,000. You didn't think about how tired you were when those were the stakes. The psychological weight of this responsibility manifested in various ways. Some workers drove themselves to physical collapse. Others developed obsessive quality control habits, checking and rechecking their welds. Still others found comfort in the mathematical certainty of production. We build 3, they sink 1, we're winning. Kaiser understood this psychology. He instituted ship naming ceremonies that involved the workers. The woman who completed the final weld would christen the ship. Workers could attend the launches on their breaks. The abstract concept of shipbuilding became concrete when you watched the vessel you'd assembled slide into the water and float. The SS Robert E. Peary, the 4-day ship, held particular significance. Workers throughout the Kaiser system took pride in that achievement. When skeptics questioned whether rushed construction produced seaworthy vessels, they pointed to the Peary. That ship, built faster than seemed physically possible, was still sailing, still carrying cargo, still proving that Kaiser's methods worked. By August 1943, Liberty ship production had become so routine that Kaiser proposed an audacious expansion. He would build a shipyard specifically designed for maximum efficiency, not a converted facility or an expanded dock. A purpose-built factory for producing ships, designed from scratch around the modular assembly process. The Maritime Commission was skeptical. Existing yards were producing adequately. Building a new facility would consume resources needed for ship construction. Kaiser argued that the new yard would produce ships faster and cheaper than existing facilities, paying for itself within a year. He got approval. Swan Island Yard in Portland, Oregon began construction in September 1943. The facility was designed like an automobile assembly plant. Linear production flows, minimal material movement, optimized workstation layouts. Everything is positioned to eliminate wasted motion and wasted time. Swan Island launched its first Liberty ship in February 1944. Construction time, 24 days. The yard reached full production by April, launching 30 ships per month. Kaiser had been right again. The purpose-built facility outperformed converted yards significantly. The German response to American production evolved from disbelief to desperation. Intelligence reports showing 140 ships per month being launched were initially dismissed as propaganda. No nation could produce that tonnage. The Americans were counting tugs and barges to inflate numbers. Then reconnaissance aircraft photographed American shipyards. The images showed dozens of vessels in various stages of construction at each facility. Photo interpreters counted 73 ships visible at West Coast yards alone in a single reconnaissance flight. The American claims were not propaganda. They were, if anything, understated. Admiral Donitz presented Hitler with a stark assessment in May 1943. The Americans are building merchant ships faster than we can build U-boats. They are building merchant ships faster than we can train crews for U-boats. They are building merchant ships faster than we can produce torpedoes. Unless we achieve a fundamental breakthrough in submarine technology, the Battle of the Atlantic cannot be won. Hitler ordered development of Type 21 U-boats, advanced submarines with greater underwater speed and operational range. But the Type 21 program faced the same constraints as every German weapons program: limited industrial capacity, skilled labor shortages, and chronic material deficits. Germany couldn't build advanced submarines in quantity while simultaneously producing tanks, aircraft, ammunition, and everything else required to fight a multi-front war. The United States faced no such constraints. American industrial capacity was so vast that Liberty ship production consumed less than 5% of steel output. Aircraft production consumed 15%. Tank production, 8%, ammunition production 12%. The economy was producing everything simultaneously, in quantities that exceeded military requirements by comfortable margins. This abundance manifested in ways that stunned both allies and enemies. Ships arrived in Britain loaded with cargo, and often carried additional supplies stacked on deck. Tanks were shipped in such quantity that units could be equipped with spares for every major component. Ammunition was expended in training because production exceeded consumption, even with liberal use in combat. Sergeant James Walsh, an artillery forward observer in Italy, later described the psychological impact. "We called for fire support without worrying about ammunition expenditure. We knew the shells would keep coming. The Germans rationed ammunition carefully. We used it like water, not wastefully, but without the anxiety they felt. That difference, multiplied across the entire front, meant we could always bring more firepower to bear." The Liberty ships made this abundance possible. They were the logistics pipeline that kept armies supplied, populations fed, and industries running. They were arguably the most important weapon America produced, though they carried weapons rather than firing them. The SS Benjamin Warner demonstrated this importance in November 1943. The Warner sailed from Norfolk carrying 10,000 tons of ammunition bound for Italy. In the Mediterranean, the ship struck a mine. The explosion tore a 40-foot hole in the hull below the waterline. Water flooded 3 holds. The ship took a 15-degree list. Standard procedure called for immediate abandonment. Ammunition ships that were breached typically exploded catastrophically. The crew stayed aboard. The damage-controlled parties sealed bulkheads, established pumping operations, and stabilized the list. The Warner continued to port under her own power. She unloaded her cargo, underwent temporary repairs, and sailed back to the United States. The ship that should have exploded instead delivered its cargo and survived. The Warner's survival wasn't luck. Liberty ship designers had incorporated multiple redundancies specifically because they knew construction speed might create weak points. Watertight compartments could be sealed independently. Pumping systems had backup power supplies. The hull structure distributed stress through multiple load paths. A failure in one system didn't cascade into total failure. This robust design philosophy contrasted sharply with German engineering. German ships were magnificently engineered for efficiency. Every component was optimized for performance. But this optimization created fragility. One critical system failing could cripple the entire vessel. German designers assumed proper construction and maintenance. Liberty ship designers assumed imperfect construction and minimal maintenance. In wartime conditions, the latter assumption proved correct. By early 1944, the strategic situation had transformed so completely that the Maritime Commission began reducing Liberty ship orders. The tonnage crisis had been solved. Existing production exceeded requirements. Some yards began transitioning to Victory ships, faster and more sophisticated vessels designed for post-war commercial use. Kaiser's yards continued operating at full capacity, but the focus shifted toward specialized vessels, tankers for naval task forces, landing craft for amphibious operations, troop transports, fleet oilers, anything that supported the offensive operations planned for 1944 and 1945. The invasion of Normandy in June 1944 represented the culmination of Allied logistics supremacy. The 156,000 troops who landed on D-Day were supported by a logistics infrastructure that delivered 26,000 tons of supplies daily. This supply flow depended entirely on cargo ships, many of them Liberty ships, shuttling between British ports and artificial harbors off the French coast. The SS Charles Carroll, launched from Richmond Yard in March 1944, made 73 round trips across the English Channel between June and September 1944. Each crossing took 8 hours. Each voyage carried 10,000 tons of cargo. In 4 months, one ship transported 730,000 tons of material. That single vessel delivered enough supplies to support an entire division for 6 months. Multiply that by the hundreds of cargo ships in operation, and the scale becomes apparent. The Allied armies in France consumed 20,000 tons of ammunition daily during offensive operations. They burned 800,000 gallons of gasoline daily. They required 100,000 tons of food weekly. All of it arrived by ship. German defenders watching this logistics machine operate understood their situation was hopeless. General Major Fritz Bayerlein, commanding Panzer Lehr Division, later recalled, "We could destroy their tanks, kill their soldiers, stop their attacks. It didn't matter. The next day, they had more tanks, more soldiers, more ammunition than before. We couldn't replace anything. Every loss was permanent. They could replace everything. Victory was mathematically impossible." The Liberty ships that made this replacement possible continued serving after European victory. In the Pacific, they supplied the island-hopping campaign that pushed toward Japan. They carried fuel to the Third Fleet, ammunition to the Marine divisions, food to the occupation forces, equipment to the air bases being built across thousands of islands. The SS John W. Brown participated in more amphibious operations than any other Liberty ship. It supported landings in the Philippines, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. The ship survived kamikaze attacks, typhoons, and countless voyages through submarine-infested waters. It was present in Tokyo Bay when Japan surrendered. The ship, built in 56 days by inexperienced workers, witnessed the end of the war it had helped win. In September 1945, as Japan signed surrender documents aboard USS Missouri, 2,400 Liberty ships were in service worldwide. They were transporting occupation forces to Japan and Germany, repatriating prisoners of war, carrying relief supplies to liberated territories, beginning the massive logistics effort of demobilization.
The ships continued serving for decades. Many were sold to commercial operators and hauled cargo well into the 1970s. Some were converted to specialized purposes. The SS Horace Bushnell became a floating fish processing plant. The SS Albert M. Bow became a grain storage facility. Liberty ships, never designed for long service, proved remarkably adaptable and durable. The final active Liberty ship, the SS Arthur M. Huddle, was scrapped in 2009, 66 years after construction. It had outlived most of the workers who built it. The emergency wartime design, built to last 5 years, had lasted 7 decades. 2 Liberty ships survive as museum vessels: the SS Jeremiah O'Brien in San Francisco and the SS John W. Brown in Baltimore. Both remain operational. Volunteers maintain the reciprocating engines, the obsolete steam systems, the mechanical steering. Annual cruises demonstrate that these ships, built in weeks by amateur shipbuilders, still float and sail 80 years later. Walking the decks of the O'Brien or the Brown provides visceral understanding of what Kaiser achieved. The ships are not elegant. The accommodations are Spartan. The machinery is crude. Everything about them screams adequate rather than excellent. But they work. The engines turn, the rudder answers, the hull remains watertight. These vessels, built faster than seemed possible by workers who learned on the job, remain functional after 8 decades. That durability stands as testament to the fundamental soundness of Kaiser's approach. Build it quickly, build it adequately, build it in quantity. Quality through volume rather than perfection through craft. The final accounting of Kaiser's achievement requires examining not just ships built, but strategic consequences enabled. The Liberty ship program didn't just replace sunk tonnage, it created logistics supremacy that fundamentally altered how the Allies could wage war.
Before mass ship production, military operations were constrained by logistics. Armies advanced until supply lines stretched beyond capacity, then paused while logistics caught up. This rhythm characterized warfare for centuries: move, stop, resupply, move again. The tempo of operations was dictated by transportation capacity. American production broke this constraint. By 1944, logistics capacity exceeded operational requirements. Armies could advance as fast as combat allowed without worrying about supplies. The vast fleet of cargo ships ensured that whatever was needed arrived. This freedom transformed Allied operations from logistics-constrained grinding advances into rapid mobile warfare. The German military, operating under constant logistic strain, never achieved this freedom. Every operation was planned around fuel availability. Every offensive was timed to ammunition stockpiles. Every division's effectiveness was degraded by missing equipment and insufficient supplies. The German army fought brilliantly under impossible logistics constraints, but brilliance without supplies eventually fails. The Liberty ships provided those supplies, not elegantly, not efficiently by peacetime standards, but adequately and in overwhelming quantity. They carried the ammunition that won battles, the fuel that powered advances, the food that sustained armies. They were the unglamorous foundation upon which victory was built. Henry Kaiser understood this. When asked after the war what he was most proud of, he didn't mention the 4-day ship or the production records. He mentioned the letters he'd received from soldiers thanking him for the supplies that arrived when needed, the ammunition that was there when the attack came, the fuel that was available when the advance began, the food that appeared when units were exhausted. We didn't build beautiful ships. We built ships that worked. And we built enough of them that running out of supplies wasn't something our soldiers had to worry about. Let the enemy worry about logistics. Our boys could focus on fighting. This was perhaps Kaiser's greatest insight. War wasn't about building perfect weapons. It was about building adequate weapons in such quantity that perfection became irrelevant. A good ship built in a year contributed nothing to battles fought while it was under construction. An adequate ship built in a month contributed immediately. Build enough adequate ships fast enough, and strategic victory became inevitable. The Germans learned this lesson too late. By the time they understood that American production was the decisive weapon, the mathematics of defeat were irreversible. They could have built better U-boats, better fighters, better tanks. It wouldn't have mattered. America was producing adequate weapons faster than Germany could produce excellent ones. And in industrial warfare, adequate in quantity defeats excellent in scarcity every time. The Liberty ship program cost $5.2 billion and employed 640,000 workers over 4 years. It produced 27 million tons of shipping that carried 75% of all overseas cargo during the war. The return on investment, measured in strategic impact, may have been the highest of any single weapons program in history. Those ships, built by housewives and farmers who became welders and shipfitters, won the Battle of the Atlantic, supplied the liberation of Europe, enabled the Pacific Campaign, and proved that American industrial might, properly organized, was unstoppable. They were not elegant weapons, they were blunt instruments of logistics, but they won the war as surely as any bomber or battleship. Kaiser's yards went silent in 1945. The workers dispersed. The prefabrication areas were dismantled. The building ways stood empty. The thunder of construction that had echoed across San Francisco Bay for 4 years faded into memory. But the lesson remained. When the nation needed ships, a man who had never built one produced more tonnage than the rest of American yards combined. Not through maritime expertise, but through organizational genius applied without mercy to every limitation and bottleneck. He broke shipbuilding into pieces, made each piece simple enough for anyone to complete, and assembled those pieces faster than enemies could sink them. The experts said it couldn't be done. The maritime establishment said shipbuilding required years of training and months of construction. The Navy said welded ships were inferior to riveted vessels. The Germans said American production claims were propaganda. Henry Kaiser never cared what they said. He looked at an impossible problem, build 10,000-ton ships in weeks, and saw only interesting engineering challenges. He solved those challenges with parallel production, modular assembly, unskilled labor performing specialized tasks, and ruthless elimination of every inefficiency. The result was 2,710 Liberty ships that kept the Allies fighting when defeat through starvation seemed certain. The result was logistics supremacy that transformed how modern warfare could be waged. The result was strategic victory achieved through production rather than combat. They said it couldn't be done. They said ships required craftsmanship and time. They said welding was inadequate and speed meant weakness. They said a dam builder couldn't teach shipyards anything. They were wrong. The Liberty ships sailed, the convoys arrived, the armies were supplied, the war was won. And 80 years later, 2 ships built in weeks by amateur workers still float in American harbors. Silent testament to what happens when impossible meets American industrial determination. The thunder has faded, but the victory it forged remains. Henry Kaiser, the mad shipbuilder who knew nothing about ships, taught the world how to build them. Not beautifully, not perfectly, but fast enough and plentiful enough to bury the enemy under an avalanche of steel. He built 100 ships in 100 days. Then he built 2,610 more, and America won.